How can we avoid partnership disputes? So LLCs get all the hype these days. Everyone talks about forming an LLC for your business. It's the new way to go. We'll set up a new media company. But LLCs aren't your only option. You can actually consider a partnership. And if you plan it right, it might be the right move for you and your partners. What the partnership's going to offer you is a shared ownership, shared skills, and some risk. But if you plan it out correctly in advance, if you create a strong partnership agreement, this can be a great way for you and your business partners to start a business. So we're going to look through some of the ways that we can build a strong business partnership and working with an attorney to make sure that everything is documented correctly. The first thing we want to do is draft a partnership agreement. Now, you should know that, for example, Minnesota does not require that you have a partnership agreement. So if you don't have an agreement, what that means is that your agreement is the default, which means the state of Minnesota's laws. So they have a set of general statutes that govern what happens in partnerships. And those rules may be fine. It's kind of like a template that you would buy from some mail merging website online. But you're missing out the ability to craft that partnership and create the partnership the way you want it to be made, the way you and your partners want to be interacting with each other. You don't necessarily want the default that the state of Minnesota or whatever state you're in is providing you. So at a minimum, when we're looking at our partnership agreement, there's a few things we need to include. First things first, ownership shares. So the partnership doesn't have to be a simple 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. We can have different ownership structures. People can own different percentages of the business. Next thing we want to make sure we discuss is any profit and loss sharing. So how are profits shared? How are losses going to be paid? How is that going to be split amongst the partners? Just like with the ownership, it doesn't necessarily have to be that even 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 each. We can have different percentages based upon the different levels of ownership. A very important key to your document is going to be decision-making rules. So how do the partners make decisions? Do we have meetings? Do we have written resolutions? Do we have some other form? Hopefully it's not just like a question on a Slack channel, but we want to make sure we have some kind of procedure in place and documented that says how decisions are going to be made for your partnership. Next step is make sure we have a dispute resolution provision. Now, if you don't have any dispute resolution provisions and it ends up being a fight between partners, you can end up in your local courthouse in a lawsuit that could take 18 months to 5 years, maybe longer, maybe shorter. But we want to make sure when we're crafting this agreement that we have some kind of provision for how disputes are to be handled. The common ways we can see is either one, saying that all disputes go to court, which is not a very economical way to treat it. Another way to do it is that it goes to arbitration, which can also be relatively expensive, but it's binding upon the parties, so you do get something worked out for sure. Or you can have a mediation provision, which is where you would go to a mediator and the parties would try to work out some kind of an agreement without needing to go to court. And that usually saves you some money and gives you more flexibility in crafting a solution to your problems. And then the final thing we want to make sure we have listed is what are the exit plans? So what if one partner wants to leave? Or let's say the other partners want one of the partners to leave and they want to force that partner out. What does that process look like? What is the plan for that? We want to make sure we spell out as much as we can in this partnership agreement so that we aren't left with any gray areas in case something happens down the road. The next step we need to do with the partnership is make sure that the partners are talking. We want to talk early. We want to talk often. We want to make sure that there is communication. The best partnerships thrive on open and honest communication. We need conversations, and you can decide how you want to do it. It can be in person, it can be Zoom, it could be on a Slack channel, whatever works for you. But you want to make sure that you're being transparent with your partners because that's where the trust is going to come from, and that's going to help you alleviate some of the disputes that you may run into. Next thing we need to look at is setting that decision-making framework that we talked about in your partnership agreement. You don't want to just wing it and see what's going to happen and figure out later on how you're going to make major decisions. You can use things like decision matrices. You can have different levels of authority. So this partner handles this and this partner handles that. We can have strategy sessions, whether with all the partners or whether with maybe a business coach or a financial advisor or the lawyer for the company. Whatever it may be, we want to make sure we have some kind of a framework in place for when the partnership is called upon to make a major decision. It's going to keep everybody aligned and everybody understands what has to happen next. And so as part of this entire process, that's where I'm going to come in and we're going to suggest that you bring in a lawyer. So it's going to be self-serving. I'm a lawyer, so of course I'm going to tell you go speak to a lawyer to create a partnership agreement. But working with a lawyer can save you in a lot of different ways. First of all, it can save you from some very costly legal disputes down the road. As I said at the top of the video, if we don't have anything in place, then you're stuck with a lawsuit between the partners that can take 18 months to 5 years, maybe even longer, depending how intricate the dispute is. Lawyers can help you look for compliance gaps. So if you're preparing your documents or if you're doing your filings with the state and we find that there's some compliance you haven't done. And then also we can make sure that we're avoiding those business ending mistakes. So big mistakes that the partnership may make that would endanger its future. So the lawyers are going to tell you, bring in a lawyer so we can work on the front end to make sure we have everything in place so you don't need us on the back end. Lawyers are always a lot more expensive afterwards when we have to come in and fix a mess versus getting in front of the problem and making sure we have everything designed out and ready to go for you and your company. If we're looking at a dispute between you and your partners, one suggestion we usually use is what we call ADR, which is Alternative Dispute Resolution. Again, I talked about this when we looked at the terms in a partnership agreement, but you're going to have fights with your partners. There's going to be disagreements. The question is how much of a disagreement it is and how serious and how are we going to get to a resolution. So ADR, things like arbitration and mediation, are great ways for you to try to informally resolve your disputes without having to go into that lawsuit that could take years. So in arbitration, we've got an arbitrator would then hear the dispute between the two of you, and it would be a private proceeding, and they would then render a decision that would be binding upon you, versus mediation, where the parties are really trying to discuss a resolution with the mediator. They're going to try to get you to a resolution that everyone can agree to. It is also private. It's usually cheaper and faster than a lawsuit, but it's not binding. So if you go through mediation, you get all the way till the end, and you're unable to find a way through to an agreement, then you still may have to go either the arbitration or the lawsuit route. However, by starting with mediation, you may be able to get your issue resolved up front. And then finally, what we're going to look at is let's make sure we plan for the inevitable. So things like death, illness, and divorce. So we want to make sure our partnership agreement is covering major life events. We want to have things like buy-sell agreements, key person insurance, succession plans. We want to bake this all into the agreement so that just in case one of these major life events happens, we know we have things planned out. For example, if we look at the divorce, so if you and your two partners are all married and one of you goes through a divorce, your partnership can get dragged into that divorce proceeding, especially if you didn't even have a partnership agreement. And you could find at the end of the day that it's now 1/3, and then the divorcing partner's now got 1/6 share and his former spouse has 1/6 share. And that former spouse is not going to be fun to deal with as you try to operate the business. They can be very ornery. They can just say, I don't want anything. I just want to make your life a living hell if I can. And you don't want that to even be an option. So what we can do is plan for what happens to your partnership share in the case of a divorce. We look at it as future proofing. What can we do throughout this process to future-proof your partnership from any kinds of disputes or problems that will endanger the business down the road? If you have more questions, you want to talk about putting together a partnership agreement for your company, you can go to my website, andrewmayers.com. There's a red legal strategy session button on the front page. Click that and you'll be taken to a scheduling page where we can find a 15 or 20-minute phone call to talk about where the partnership and the partnership agreements fit into you and your business. These partnerships work best for you when we're planning for the worst, and then we are leading with clarity. We want to make sure that we're putting the groundwork in now for a strong, prosperous partnership to last for years and years and years.